I originally thought it was this like very simple hero-villain story.
Can't be that simple.
It wasn't that simple,
Right.
and very quickly I realized that the lines between good and evil were much more blurry than I thought.
Hi, I'm Catherine Bigelow. I'm here with Matthew Heineman to talk about his movie Cartel Land for Vice Talks Film.
I believe what I am doing is good, and what I'm standing up against is evil.
Somos los cocineros de metanfetamina. Claro que hacemos daño, lo sabemos.
It's the cartels. They're the ones terrorizing their own country, and now they're starting to do it over here.
¿Qué harías tú? ¿Esperar que vinieran por ti o defenderte? Y ármense, únanse.
The cartel scouts keep getting away.
Where did you learn about Cartel Land and the Vigilantes?
I read a few articles about these citizens who were rising up against the cartel, and it fascinated me. It was a world I knew nothing about, and I really wanted to sort of go out and see the effects on everyday people and see everyday people who were rising to fight back.
And how did you get access to the Vigilantes?
So the story exists, there's two different vigilante groups, one in Arizona,
Right.
one in Mexico. The group in Arizona, it actually took several months to sort of gain their trust before I stepped foot down there. Once I was down there, they sort of welcomed me with open arms.
You're talking about Naylor.
Naylor
Yeah.
on the Arizona side.
Yeah.
And I filmed there for about 4 or 5 months, and then heard about the Autodefensas, these citizens in the state of Michoacan who were fighting back against the Knights Templar cartel. And I reached out to El Doctor, who's the leader of this vigilante group.
You become aware of the doctor. Now, how did you actually get access to him? It's not like you necessarily had a cell number. I mean, like, how do you get access to this man who's rising up against the cartels?
I read this article, and I reached out to the journalist, and I asked her, this article featured the doctor, and I asked her, what he was like, and she said, he's the most interesting man I've ever been around. And as a documentary filmmaker, that's a nice thing to hear.
Right.
And so I said, I think I'm onto something here.
Yeah,
and
you're on the next flight to Michoacan.
Yeah, so 2 weeks later, I was down there with him. No, so I called him. I got his number through her and called him, and he said, come on down. There's many similarities and differences between the two storylines, but at its heart are these two men, Naylor and El Doctor. They're both 55. They both believe that the government's failed them. They both sort of taken the law into their own hands to fight for what they believe in. But the circumstances are quite different. In Mexico, the violence is real, it's visceral. 80,000 plus people killed since 2007. 20,000 plus people disappeared since 2007. Whereas in Arizona, that violence is more theoretical. It's more, a fear that these Mexican drug wars will seep its way across our border.
Technically, we're vigilantes upholding the law where there is no law. But the phrase vigilante, it's been given a bad name by the media.
They are heavily armed and claim to be protecting our state from foreign threats and from our own government. But the state's growing militia movement is causing concern among law enforcement.
Fire!
Back in the day, vigilante wasn't a bad thing. Say the bandits was riding into your town, the townspeople would all get together and, defend their town.
You start with Naylor and these self-appointed vigilantes who are there to guard the border. Now, does border control know about them? Are they working in conjunction with them?
And that's the thing, I'm from New York City, and when you step foot in Arizona, when you step foot on the border, you really sort of don't feel like you're in America. You drive along on these missions in the valley, and you can look up on the hillsides, and there's cartel scouts watching you. You can break into their sort of radio frequencies and hear them talking about you. So again, you sort of feel like you're in this world that's controlled by the cartels, even though you're on American soil. And when you talk to Border Patrol, they feel like they're undermanned, understaffed, and like the vigilantes fighting this sort of David and Goliath battle against the cartel.
Now, do they appreciate people like Naylor?
It's complicated. You know, I think it took me a while to sort of understand the dynamics.
Right.
I think officially, no, you know, we have nothing to do with the vigilantes. We don't approve of what they're doing. But the reality on the ground is so different. I mean, they basically collaborate.
Right.
They talk. They share information. I think Border Patrol actually sort of welcomes them. I think they need all the help they can get.
Anybody touches me, drop them. You savvy?
Ustedes lo están viendo es porque yo ya dejé de existir.
This doctor had not just the charisma, but the courage to rise up against them, kind of single-handedly, until he was able to, you know, inspire a movement.
Yeah, I mean that's the crazy thing about this. I mean these are not like trained soldiers on the Mexican side. These are not trained soldiers. These are farmers, you know, storekeepers, doctors, lawyers. People would cover this story in Mexico a little bit, and they'd often sort of fly in and out and go in for a day or two. And I told them, look, you know, I want to come down. I want to document your story. I want to document the story of the auto defenses. I don't want to just come down for a day or two. I want to come down for weeks, months, however long it takes to tell the story. And I think he really appreciated that. I think that helped me sort of gain his trust and you know, get access to the story. And I've always found that, you know, whether you're filming in an emergency room or wherever, that once you sort of get buy-in from the top, that people underneath them sort of fall in line. And, you know, once I got his approval, once I got on the ground there, I pretty much had carte blanche access to, you know, people within the auto defenses.
El gobierno no proporciona las garantías de seguridad que el pueblo necesita. Nos podemos armar.
They're taking back what is theirs from the cartel. That's the way it should be done up here, too.
Talk to us a little bit about Michoacan itself. You know, here you are, you're obviously not a local. And, you know, what did it feel like to be down there, shooting on those streets?
I think for me, what was so striking, especially when I first got down there, was the suffering of these people living under the sort of control of the cartels. You know, it's not an accident that the film's called Cartel Land. I mean, you really feel, both in Arizona, but especially in Mexico, that this world is controlled by the cartels, that there's an absolute lack of government, that the very institutions that are there to protect us are either not there or they are there in collusion with the cartels. You know this, you know, with the films that you've made. In a traditional war zone, there's often, you know, a line and there's the danger zone, and then when you're behind that line, you're somewhat safe. I mean, here, it was such amorphous warfare. The violence can erupt at any moment. You could be riding down the street and there could be bodies hanging from the bridge. You could be at lunch and, you know, masked men could just come and grab, you know, people next to you. But they continue to live their lives, you know? There could be a shootout one day and then they're out, you know, dancing in the streets that night. Shooting there is like, it was unlike anything I'd ever done.
Yeah,
You know,
I can
normally
imagine.
on a documentary shoot, you know, you have a call time, you have a lunch break, you know, you have a wrap time, and like, you know, it's
You're
just
on
not-
call. You're on call 24/7.
Yeah, I mean,
on
we'd
this.
shoot sometimes 18 to 20 hours
Right.
a day. You know, we'd be sleeping in cars on the ground. At one point, we slept in the backyard of the head of the cartel after they tried to find him, and he escaped up into the mountains. You know, it was a very abnormal way of shooting.
You're with this doctor. You're with the auto defense. Many times in the movie, certainly auto defense is advertising themselves with T-shirts that say auto defense, so you're not like undercover. And did you fear for your life on a daily basis?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a war reporter. I've never been in situations like this before. My last film was on healthcare in the U.S., you know, which is a different type of battle. But it was scary, you know? It was scary filming there, and the story led me in places that I never could have imagined or dreamed of. You know, ultimately, I ended up being in shootouts between the vigilantes and the cartel, meth labs in the dark desert night, places of torture. And it was frightening. You know, it was frightening filming there. And it was also frightening because you often didn't know who you're with, especially as the story sort of evolved.
Like, are these the good guys or are these the bad guys?
Yeah.
Like, are you auto defense or are you transitioning to, you know, Knights Templar?
Yeah, I mean, at first, I really thought it was this sort of heroic, simple story of good guys versus bad guys. And then the more and more time we spent down there, the more and more these lines between good and evil became blurry. And for me as a filmmaker, that was obviously as things started to get more and more interesting. And I almost became obsessed with trying to understand what was really happening, who these guys really were. And that, I think, sort of led me also into some pretty dark places. I think, you know, part of the way that cartels work, and part of the way especially the Knights Templar work, is through fear. You know, they invoke fear in every aspect of life. And one of the things that made the Knights Templar particularly unique, well, first of all, they sort of have this like pseudo-religious, sort of Christian, medieval, twisted way of operating, hence the name Knights Templar.
Right.
You know, where they believe that they're doing good.
Right.
They believe that they're there to protect the people, and obviously doing quite the opposite. And but they actually came into Michoacan as almost like a vigilante group, really professing to be there to protect the people. And then
so the cycle kind of keeps repeating itself, although the imprimatur is different, you know, on which side of the goalpost you find yourself.
Despite leaders who perhaps have noble intentions, you can't always control people within your ranks.
Or when the law is part of the organization that the common man has to fight against, you know, then what are the rules?
What are the rules? And that's what part of this story is, you know, the lines between all these groups were so blurry. Exactly. The lines between the auto defenses, the government, the cartels, the meth cookers, you know, in the end,
it's this big fabric.
It's very hard to...
Very interconnected.
Completely.
Échate la mano para atrás. Échate la mano para atrás. Echa la mano para atrás. Puta madre, súbase a la verga, súbase. Cállese, órale, agáchate la mano para atrás. Órale, puta madre, súbete. Aquí ya no cabe, aquí ya no cabe. ¡Ey, armas! Chequen que deje armas, güeyes, primero. Pues a la verga, ¿sabes quién soy, puto? Te cargó la verga, perro. Sí, güey. Puta madre.
In spite of it being an incredibly life-threatening shoot, you managed to create images that are breathtaking. You've got these extraordinary shots, and yet many times you've got your camera and you're running for your life. So how can you do both? And I'm very envious of that.
Do you want to go down and do the sequel? You can head down there. The aesthetic, the look was really important. You know, I think it was such a dramatic story that we're telling. The characters were very, you know, dramatic in the setting, the scenes were, and so, you know, I really wanted to try to match that with the visual look of how we were shooting the film. And actually, like, being behind the camera for a lot of it, and being behind the camera during the shootouts and other scenes like that, the craft of filmmaking actually, like, calmed me down.
Almost inoculates you to fear.
Yeah, I mean, like, you know, in that first shootout, you know, every day we wore bulletproof vests. But this was it was like a really hot day, and we're at a car dealership.
And you didn't have it on?
I was like, there's no way anything's gonna happen. Like, this is just kind of a dud of a day. And they get this call saying, we know where these two assassins are, and everyone just jumps in the car, and they head to this warehouse. I didn't have my vest on, and boom, we're like right in the middle of it.
Si tiene mucho poder para allá, ¿no?
For me, like, in that scene, like, I just really tried to focusing on framing, on making sure I was recording. And I think that helped calm me down. The scariest moment for me was an interview that I did with a young woman who was kidnapped by the cartel with her husband, taken to a safe house, and she witnessed him being chopped up to pieces and then burned to death in front of her. And to be next to this woman, to look at her and to see her to see this sort of body that was there. But when you looked into her eyes, they were so deeply hollow, and almost as if like her soul had been sucked out of her. And for me to sort of hear her and hear the horrors of her describing this, and to think that we're the same species of human beings that would do that to other people, that stuck with me much more so than any other more sort of like bang bang or action scene, just psychologically. When the Knights Templar let her go, they said that the gift that they were going to give to her for sparing her life was to be crazy for the rest of her life. That was their gift to her. It's crazy. I mean, the suffering down there is really unbelievable.
No nos vamos a convertir en los criminales que andamos combatiendo.
¿Con quién trabajas?
Talk a little bit about what you think the impact in America will be and how little I think we know about what's going on south of the border.
I think part of what I hope happens with this film is it really opens people's eyes to a world that they've never seen before, especially in America. You know, we've seen this narco violence sort of glorified in various shows and movies, but I really want people to understand that there's a war that's happening in the country just south of us, in a country that we share so much history with, we share a border with. You know, we talk about ISIS, we talk about all these, groups around the world, but there's this war that's happening that we're connected to, that we're tied to it. You know, the drugs that we consume here are the basis for that war.
We're perpetuating it.
Yeah, we're perpetuating it, and the basis for that violence. As long as there's a demand for drugs here in the States, there'll be a supply of drugs from Mexico and South America. And even as we've legalized, weed, the amount of marijuana coming across the border has gone down. The amount of meth, cocaine, and heroin has gone up. So the cartels will always find a way to make money. And, that this, unfortunately, this cycle will continue.
What kind of impact do you anticipate this film will have in Mexico once it's released? Do you think it'll inspire a new auto defense? Do you think it'll inspire ordinary citizens to rise up against the oppression of these organizations?
It's a complex film, and it ends in a complex place, but I think hopefully one of the legacies of auto defense is people feeling, they're sick and tired of this, and people going out there and speaking out. And right, as we were finishing the cut that we submitted to Sundance, there's a horrible thing that happened in the state of Guerrero, which is just south of Michoacan, where 43 students were murdered. They were kidnapped by the police, arrested by the police, handed over to the cartel, and then incinerated. 43 students, 18 to 30 years old.
Was that ordered by the cartel?
Yeah. And it shows, the story of what this film shows too, of just the blurry lines between cartel, police, government. I find hope in people speaking out against these horrors and being tired of living in this fear. They really live in a lawless world, where their government isn't there. And so I hope that this film shows people this world. I hope it sort of takes this issue away from the headlines, and really gives you entree, viscerally, emotionally, to what it's like to be there. And this sort of story, this complicated story of citizens taking the law into their own hands to fight back. And, I really, really hope that this film will provoke a dialogue. And we fought really hard to get the film distributed down there. There's a few hiccups along the way, but it's being released the same time it's being released in the States. And, I'm really excited to see the conversation that it provokes.